Hi, and welcome to the third part of this e-learning program. In the first two modules, you gain an understanding of the essentials of green bonds, the steps of setting up a green bond framework, as well as several market aspects such as pricing. In this third module, we focus on definitions, external review, and impact reporting. You will learn from Harald Franke-Lund and Christina Alnes from the Climate Research Institute CICERO, the leading second opinion provider globally, about the different types of external review, as well as methodologies and requirements for sound second opinions and impact reporting. You will also gain an understanding of the critical role both play in safeguarding integrity in the green bond market. So let's get started.
A green bond is just a normal bond. The only difference is that it's green. The key question is therefore, what is green in the green bond market? Is it green to invest in energy efficiency in a refinery? Is it green to invest in energy efficient buildings in an airport? Is it green to invest in scrubbers in shipping? And who decides on whether this is green or not? It's an easy answer to the last question. It's the investors that decides. It's a voluntary market. The investors decide whether they want to buy a bond or not. However, in this market, there are some guidelines and regulation that helps investors to take the right decisions. We have the green bond principles. They are global voluntary principles for issuing a green bond that the majority of issuers and investors and underwriters have signed up to. They focus on transparency in the green bond market. They focus on defining what is green, the management of the proceeds, the selection procedures, and the reporting. In addition to these green bond principles, in different regions of the world, you have some country level, regional level guidelines. The most advanced regional market when it comes to regulation is the Chinese market, where you have clear definitions on what qualify as green. In South Asia, in the Asian market, you also have some principles, regional principles, but mostly implementing the green bond principles. But they have included a definition where they exclude fossil fuel for electricity production, for example. You also have the stock exchanges that play a key role in this market. Almost all of them are required to have external reviews in order to qualify as being a green bond, to be listed on the stock exchange. Key stock exchanges, a Luxembourg Stock Exchange, the London Stock Exchange, but you also have the Mexican Stock Exchange, and there are many more around the globe. In addition to the stock exchanges, you also have the green bond indices and funds that have created their own criteria for what they define as green. And there are, for example, such as MSCI, you have the S&P Dow Jones Indices, you also have BlackRock with their own definitions. And there might be different views on, for example, whether large hydro could be included in a green bond portfolio. Since it is the investors that decides what is green in this market, the key is that green bonds open a communication channel between issuers and investors. Those investors that want to invest in green projects and those issuers that have green projects that they want to get financed. This communication is facilitated by including external reviewers. External reviewers like Cicero, we use climate science as a base when we look at how green a project is and help investors to better understand what is needed in the transition towards a low carbon and climate resilient future. There are different types of external reviews in the market. The green bond principles group external reviews into 4 categories. I represent a second party opinion provider. We have competitors in the market like Sustainalytics and BGO Ares. What we do is that we give a second opinion on the issuer's green bond framework, their first opinion. You also have verifiers in this market. For example, in the Chinese model, they verify that the projects are in accordance with the definitions. Very often, the verifiers are typically accountancy firms. You also have, you might have heard of the climate bonds standards. They set up a system where you need to be certified. So that means if an issuer decides to go to the market according to this CBI standard, they need to be certified so that they are able to follow the standard. In addition, the 4th category, you have green bond scoring and rating organizations. Typically, these are the financial raters like Moody's and Standard & Poor's. But also like Cicero, we are a second party opinion provider, but we also provide, we call it a shade of green. So a type of scoring of the framework. So this is how the green bond principles, they group the external reviews into 4 different groups. You could also look at the reviews on a timeline. Then some of them are provided before the issuance and others after the issuance. Typically, second opinions, green scoring ratings, and certification against the standard happens pre-issuance. In addition to this, you also have consultancy on framework design. That's something you learn about in webinar 2. It has been highlighted in the green bond principles, as I said, that you should not do both external review and consultancy on framework design. Then it's not an external review. It needs to be a first opinion and a second opinion. What happens after the issuance? It could be either that you verify, as I said, according to a catalog or a CBI standard, but it could also be that you verify the projects fall under the definitions of your green bond framework. You could also look at external review approaches in a timeline perspective. The first you do when you set up a green bond framework, you often get help with that, and that's something you learn about at webinar 2, consultancy on framework design. That is different from external reviews. That's about setting up a green bond framework, which is the first opinion. The second opinion is something that is provided before the issuance of the green bonds in order for investors to see if this is something to provide transparency towards investors, to facilitate the decisions on the investor side on whether they want to buy these bonds or not. Highlighting key concerns from the second opinion providers, or strengths, weaknesses, and pitfalls in the frameworks. You could also do this through a scoring or rating system, such as some of the financial credit rating agencies have developed their own methodologies on green ratings. CICERO do our shades of green that you will learn more about later. Also, certification against the standard is something that is provided pre-issuance. To see, the idea behind certification is to see if you are able to comply with the standard. Post-issuance is more for verifying that what types of project that has been financed, and also if you have achieved any impacts by investing in these projects. You will learn more about what types of indicators that are relevant for investors later. So while second opinions, ratings, and certifications are pre-issuance verification of use of proceeds and impacts are post-issuance. And of course, if you want to update the framework, then you will also need an updated second opinion or an updated rating. And you might want to update your framework if you include more project categories, new project categories. So who are the external reviewers in the market? This graph shows some key players in the market: CICERO, Sustainalytics, Vigeo Eiris, Ernst & Young, ISS Ökom, DNVGL are the major players in this external review market. In 2018, June 2018, we got some guidelines. The market agreed to provide some guidelines on what they expect from external reviews in the green bond market. These guidelines focus on integrity, objectivity. These are, of course, key issues if you're going to provide external reviews. You have to make sure that you are independent of the banks, the underwriters, and the issuers. Like CICERO, we use climate science as our base. That's our integrity. And you have to make sure that you have enough professional competence. For us, again, that means that you have environmental competence. The role of the external reviewers is to provide transparency on green issues. You need to know what this means. And of course, also because this is market sensitive information that you get, in particular before issuance, you need to treat the information that you get secret. So you need to put confidentiality, you need to have confidentiality high on the agenda. And of course, all of this means that you need to have an organization that is professional and have a professional behavior.
In this part, we will deep dive into second opinions. I will be using our process at CICERO to illustrate throughout. The second opinion process begins after the issuer has decided what projects to fund with green bond financing and drafted a green bond framework. Our assessments are desk reviews, and we rely on documentation from the issuer. Aside from the framework, key documents to include are the environmental and climate-related strategies, reporting and targets, as well as other relevant documentation specific to your business or green projects. For example, if you're funding a portfolio of green buildings, you could include green building certifications, energy efficiency targets, and energy usage reporting. The three gears in this diagram represent the key drivers of our analysis. The green bond principles are the starting point, but they do not go far enough in defining green. Here we turn to climate science, which we supplement with any relevant standards. Going back to our example of green buildings, we could refer to BREEAM or LEED green building standards. After our initial document review and analysis, we start an iterative process with the issuer to clarify any outstanding questions. The focus of this stage, and throughout our second opinions, is to ensure that we provide transparency to investors on how the green bond framework will actually be implemented in your organization. We review the framework that the issuer is going to implement, so that strategies, reporting, and governance are important to understand how the framework is going to be implemented and will influence the shading. The second opinion report, with the final shade of green, is issued at the end of the process, usually after 3 to 5 weeks. Our rating methodology, Shades of Green, provides information to investors on climate risk. We developed this rating to emphasize that green is not binary and to avoid a single-minded focus on emissions. Based in climate science, dark green projects are the low-carbon, climate-resilient solutions, for example, renewable energy with resiliency consideration. Light green, on the other hand, are good environmental investments, but they do not bring us closer to the long-term solution. For example, efficiency in infrastructure linked to fossil fuel can lead to large emission savings, but these projects are still linked to fossil fuel technology. Medium green are the bridging technologies. Good green buildings that are not quite passive house tend to fall into this category. Not all green projects are created equal, and investors appreciate this information. At the same time, all shades of green, also light green, are needed for a successful green transition. And it seems like investors might agree. We have not heard of dark green bonds getting any preferential treatment. As an example of how we do our rating, here is a summary of the Tadao Energy Assessment. This was a unique issuance as it was the first green sukuk, a big step forward for green Islamic finance. The sukuk proceeds are funding a 50 megawatt solar power plant in Malaysia and associated interconnection. Renewable energy is key to the low carbon transition, and other elements that were positive in our assessment was that life cycle assessments were considered in supplier selection and that local environmental impact was considered in site selection. Since introducing the Shades of Green methodology in 2015, we have shaded 76 frameworks. By project categories, we can see some clear trends. Renewable energy is often dark green, efficient buildings are often medium green. There are fewer light green projects so far, and as mentioned, these are essential to a successful transition. This graph breaks down the shading by issuer type. Again, we see the same clear trends with real estate and energy. Other categories are more mixed. The shade of green is a reflection of both the ambition level of the issuer and the climate strategies. For example, we would expect that a national government, with all the different environmental priorities to be funded, would have a framework that includes all shades of green, which the Republic of Indonesia in fact did have. Here we can only see the overall medium green shading. Key focus of the external review process is not to achieve a certain rating, but to accurately provide information on the environmental characteristics of a green bond. In this final section, we will turn to impact reporting. The green bond market is about opening up a communication channel between issuers and investors, and the two most important communication tools are the external review report, pre-issuance, and impact reporting, post-issuance. Investors expect impact reporting from green bonds and expect to be informed on the environmental impact of their investments. This transparency is key to the integrity of the market. However, two important qualifications. The first is that the market is aware that there is a trade-off here, and no one wants to set the bar so high that it discourages new entrants. There are different expectations
to a large corporation with a sustainability department and a small issuer that wants to finance one solar project. Set impact reporting ambition, taking into account the size of your organization, the capacity and the complexity of the project categories to be financed. The key is to show a will to be transparent and a path to increasing data availability over time. The second qualification is that standards for impact reporting are evolving. There is no one right way to report environmental impacts. It's also key to be transparent on methodologies and assumptions and to be consistent. If you're using one set of emissions factors for corporate greenhouse gas reporting, it's advisable to use the same for green bond reporting, or to be clear on your reasoning for why you're using different impact emissions factors. On this slide, you can see a list of suggested elements to cover in your impact report. Note that investors do not want to read long reports and prefer that these impact reports are short and to the point. Investors also like to see aggregate level data if possible. Again, there are different expectations for large experienced issuers versus smaller issuers with less sustainability expertise. And the emerging best practice here is to have the report verified or reviewed by a third party. Impact metrics provide investors with quantitative measurements of direct environmental or social impact from investments. Carbon emissions are often cited as a key metric, and while emission savings can provide important information, we also encourage issuers to report on green metrics. By this we mean the measures that show the project's positive contribution to the low carbon transition. An often cited example, which is easy to measure, is the megawatt hours of electricity produced by a renewable energy source. For some projects, it may prove difficult to find exact quantitative measures, such as biodiversity conservation or climate change adaptation. In those cases, a qualitative description might be more suitable. As always, transparency should be the guiding principle when doing impact reporting. As mentioned, this is an area of innovation, and standards and guidelines are under development. ICMA working groups on impact reporting have published 3 sector guidelines so far: water and wastewater management, waste management and resource efficiency, and clean transportation. Last year, Nordic public sector issuers published a joint position paper on impact reporting. This could also be useful outside of the Nordic context. And already in 2015, MDBs published a harmonized framework for impact reporting, which covers key sectors. We'll end on some examples. This is from ICBC, the world's largest bank, and their green bond framework. This provides examples of the impact metrics they committed to report on. You can see here commitments on both emissions and several key metrics. For example, kilometers of rail tracks built and number of passengers transported by low carbon public transportation. Another example here from the World Bank's latest impact report. It's worth noting that the World Bank issued the first label green bond and has been leading the market, spearheading impact metrics and transparency. Well worth reviewing their green bond report for inspiration. Many issuers have faced capacity issues with impact reporting. Both data collection and creating reports to investors can be time-consuming. Technology platforms can reduce the resources required to report and enhance transparency to investors. As an example, the Green Asset Wallet is a GIZ-funded program with the goal to build a blockchain platform for impact reporting. In the future, green bond impact reporting might be standardized and technology-enabled. For now, focus on identifying the right level of emission, metrics that make sense for your organization and projects, and providing transparency to investors.
So let's wrap this up. After having completed this third module, you should now be familiar with the different types of external review, as well as methodologies and requirements for sound second opinions and impact reporting. You should also have an understanding of the critical role external reviews and impact reporting play in safeguarding integrity in the green bond market. If you have missed any of the previous modules covering the essentials of green bonds, the steps of setting up a green bond framework, as well as several market aspects such as pricing, you can access the content via our online learning videos. If you want to get more information on the key concepts and initiatives that were covered in this module, you find a list of references here. Thank you very much for your participation in this Green Bond online learning program. Please reach out to us if you have further questions or feedback on the Green Bond online learning series.